Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are thrilled that you've decided to spend this amazing with us today. For those of you in North America, it's Thanksgiving. For those of you on the African continent, we're in different time zones. And it's really honestly a privilege that you're selecting to spend this time with our distinguished group of panelists and the team at Wealth for Impact. My name is Ndidi Okonkwo-Uneli. I'm one of the co-founders of Wealth for Impact. And Essien, Laurie, and I started this organization to really ensure that we not only generate wealth on the continent through our businesses, entrepreneurial pursuits, but we also ensure long-term and sustainable impact from generations. And the reality is, and what propelled us, is that when we think about the good work that many of you do, we realize that so many of us are in a situation where we support a lot of people. We call it the black tax, we call it other names, but when we pass on, any of that good work that we've started is not sustained. The concepts of stewardship and strategic giving is still nascent in our ecosystem. And there's a growing recognition that all the passions, the commitment we have to filling gaps in our society have to be sustained in a strategic way in partnership with others. And that really birthed Wealth for Impact. So if you're just hearing about Wealth for Impact for the first time, I'll encourage you to visit our website, wealthforimpact.org, to follow us on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, as we build this ecosystem. Since we started 2 years ago, Wealth for Impact has been quite busy. We've had a number of webinars on succession, on family engagement, on thinking through philanthropy. We've also had one-on-one consultations with families across Africa, with a special focus on families in Nigeria and in Kenya, helping them structure their giving, helping them think through the systems and approaches they want to engage in philanthropy. We've also worked with a few corporates, not only in terms of structuring their giving, but also hiring the executive directors, setting up a board. And we do this because of our commitment to ensuring that in Africa, we build organizations that outlive us and that we ensure continuity of the passion, the vision, the engagement to serve as social change agents. It's an exciting time on the African continent. So many philanthropic initiatives are being propelled across the continent. We are seeing more innovation in how we give. We're seeing pooling of resources like never before. But we're also seeing some very, very difficult trends with climate change, with the impact and the impacts of some of the crisis in our region. Some of the coups and economic crisis in our region. We're seeing a deepening of needs, growing inequality, more desperation, and a greater call for some of you who have a passion and a desire to give back, to step into the realm and create and scale your giving in partnership with others. And so that's why we're here, and that's why we're excited about this conversation with all of you about the next gens. The power of philanthropy cannot be limited to the first generation. We have to engage the second generation. And we believe next gens are critical, not just because of Africa's demographic profile, where 70% of our population is under 35, but also because for continuity, for sustainability, for passing the baton. You're not just passing the values onto your children, you're passing the desire to make a difference, the desire to give back. And so many of us are parents. We know the strategies, the struggles, and the current phenomena with the new generation, and their desires, their passions, and what drives them. And we're going to be hearing a lot more from these next-gen leaders in our panel today. We're also going to be hearing from a well-distinguished academic who has done tremendous research on this, but I won't take the thunder off my co-founder, Essien, who is going to be leading this exciting discussion. Once again, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're delighted to have you, and we look forward to an engaging and high-impact discussion today. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Ndidi. Ndidi and I have been wanting to have this conversation for quite some time. We are really thrilled to be able to talk about the role of the next generation in philanthropy. Both Ndidi and I have our own family foundations, and we have wrestled with some of these questions and issues about how do we pass on the baton. What do we do to ensure that our aspirations for giving and philanthropy inspire the next generation? And we hope that these are some of the questions that you have as well. So we are really thrilled to have this conversation and also to learn. I think what's very clear to us is that there is quite a bit of an ecosystem shift in the philanthropy space. And it's our opportunity, particularly as the African continent, for that specific demographic reason that Ndidi mentioned, to take advantage of this, right? And we recognize that some of the older models may not be fit for purpose for what we need to do. So a couple of things that Ndidi and I believe very strongly is that philanthropy is not some grandiose thing that only very well-off people can do. It starts with anybody who desires to give back. And so I think in one way we want to inspire people to think differently about philanthropy, because it can happen at every single level. So that's one thing we believe very, very strongly. The other thing is that we believe that philanthropy in Africa in particular can start to make a significant difference in the overall development outcomes of the continent. If you look at development aid and overseas remittances, those things take up the lion's share of the support that's going towards the key development sectors that we see across our continent. But we believe that philanthropy can play a huge role going forward if we think about it differently, if we engage with it differently, and if we invite all the demographics, in particular the next generation, to really be an active part of it. So we're so excited to have this conversation today. So let me introduce the panel. So I'm going to ask them all to go put their videos on and to go. Yes, great. So let me introduce this great panel that we have with us today. Really, really excited to have a great conversation. We'll have a discussion. We really invite you all to pepper your questions and comments in the Q&A, and we'll answer, and we'll try and answer as much as we can in the conversation. And we'll do a little poll as well. So we really want to have a dynamic conversation today. So let me introduce the great panel that we have in front of us. So first, Aditya Chellaram. He is there on the screen there. He leads, and you can do a little wave there, Aditya. He leads the operations and the administration for the Chellarams group. It's a group of companies in Nigeria. If you have ever lived in Nigeria, you may know some of those companies. He's also an active trustee of the group's philanthropic arm. He is a fifth generation family business operator, and he continues a business legacy that was founded in India in 1890. And their business operations commenced in Nigeria in 1923. So there is tremendous amount of legacy there. Aditya grew up in Nigeria, and like many who have grown up in Nigeria, has been quite fascinated with the country's rich music and its arts heritage. And so with this interest, he helped start the Art House Foundation, which conducts artists residency programs in Lagos. Aditya is also an active member of YPO, which is an international network of business leaders, and he serves as the executive committee. He serves on the executive committee of YPO Arts and Travel Network. So thank you, Aditya, for joining us. Elizabeth Tanya Masiwa. She is a social entrepreneur and a smart tech executive. She's the president and CEO of Delta Philanthropies, Higher Foundation, and Akello, which is an African company transforming education with technology-based solutions. Elizabeth is a non-executive director on the boards of two of the largest listed companies in Zimbabwe on the stock exchange there, Econet Wireless Zimbabwe and Eco Cash Holdings Zimbabwe. She is a board member as well on the Higher Left Foundation board, and she serves on the boards of several charities and foundations, including Harvard University's Leadership Council for the Center of Africa Studies. She advises several entrepreneurship and philanthropy networks, and very recently, Elizabeth was appointed the Commissioner of the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission. Quite an honor. So welcome, Elizabeth. And last but not least, we have Michael Moody. Michael is a professor of philanthropic studies at Lilly Family School of Philanthropy in Indiana, at Indiana University in Indianapolis. Prior to this, he was the first holder of the Frey Foundation Chair for Family Philanthropy at the Johnson Center for Philanthropy at the Grand Valley State University. He trained as a cultural psychologist with a PhD from Princeton. Dr. Moody is the co-author of best-selling books on this topic, Understanding Philanthropy, Its Meaning and Mission, also the Philanthropy Reader, as well as Generation Impact, How Next-Gen Donors Are Revolutionizing Giving. He's a frequent speaker and sought-after commentator on philanthropic trends, whose work have been featured at in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Forbes, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, as well as Stanford Social Innovation Review, and many others. So we're really excited to be able to have the conversation with these three. And we're going to kick it off with Michael, who will give us his perspective on some of the trends that we see in the next-gen philanthropic space. He'll paint a picture for us, and I hope we can use some of those insights to really have a conversation about the relevance of some of these global trends for Africa. There are, I think, many relevant highlights that we can actually apply that are happening on the global stage, but are very relevant for what we are going to see and are currently seeing in Africa. So let me turn it over to Michael to share his perspectives. Michael, the floor is yours.
Great. Let me just share my screen here and put up some slides. Can people see my slides okay?
Yes.
You got it? All right. Great. Well, thanks again for inviting me to be part of this. It's a really, I'm sure, really interesting conversation. I'm very excited to listen to what my fellow panelists have to say as well. So I'm going to talk today about some research that we've done on the next generation of significant donors, and that was published in this book, as you just heard, called Generation Impact. And I just want to point out that this research was done primarily on donors that are based in the U.S., but that many of them also give internationally. And in talking about this and what I could contribute today, we decided it was useful to talk about this research in this context for a couple of reasons. Especially one is that not only do the donors who are engaged in these ways, the people that we talked to for this book and did our research with in this book, they are very much international in their giving, and in many cases, as you'll see. And so that's relevant, I think, especially for engagement of philanthropic next generation philanthropists in places like Africa. And then secondly, that many of the donors around the world who are next generation and are coming into their roles in their family foundations and earning their wealth and starting to do their own giving, they often take a very, what I like to think of as a cosmopolitan view. If anybody knows Kwame Anthony Apaya's work on cosmopolitanism, this idea that people are very, and you'll see that with the folks on the panel today, very engaged internationally themselves, and their orientations to things like how to be a good donor and building a philanthropic identity as a new donor or a next generation donor are coming from engagements and networks that are across national and really global. And so I think many of these trends that we're able to identify because sort of a critical mass of them in the United States, I think could very easily apply and will apply and be modified and adapted in various ways across the world. And I guess that's sort of the open question we want to start with. So just to tell you what this book is about and why it was important and why it goes to the question of why the next generation in general is important, which is we make the claim here that the next generation, those that are coming into their roles now, Gen Xer, what we think of in generationally as sort of younger Gen Xers, millennials, now Gen Z, those who have the ability for significant giving, they're going to be the most significant philanthropists in history. And it's a very dramatic thing for particularly an academic to say, but we're not the only ones saying this, and we strongly believe that this is the case. And it's not because they're more philanthropic in their spirit than other generations. It's really because they're going to have tremendous resources, more historically large resources to give because of global economic trends that are concentrating wealth. They also are coming into their roles at a time when there's significant amount of innovation, and you'll hear from folks today about the ways in which people are innovating in multiple sectors, not just the philanthropic sector. And the next generation is really excited about that innovation, changing the traditional norms of giving and philanthropy in a way that they hope will make philanthropy more effective. And so they're going to have tremendous change because of that. And then finally, they're going to be the most significant because they want to be involved their entire lives. They don't want to take the traditional model of working to make as much money as they can and then retire to philanthropy, this life of philanthropic leisure that one leads after one's career is over. They want to be involved from the very beginning of their adult lives. And for that reason, they're going to have tremendous impact. The problem is we don't really know that much about them. It's a significant group of donors and change makers and impact investors and others that we just haven't studied nearly as much as we've studied their parents and their grandparents. And so that's what we did in this book. And I'll talk through some of the major findings, but I won't take too long to go through everything because we'll have a chance to have a nice conversation later. So the first and maybe most important thing to talk about is this what we talk about in the book is their obsession with impact. They really are deeply focused on wanting to do whatever they can, even revolutionize the norms of philanthropy in order to have greater impact. That doesn't mean that they all define impact in the same way. And in fact, they often define it very differently based on different interests. What they share, though, is this desire to see the impact. They want to be able to know how their work is being, how their contributions are making a difference, moving the needle. And that includes things like, well, we had one, just for example, one person that we interviewed, it was an anonymous interview, but he said, my family meets in a boardroom in Manhattan to talk about our grants all over the world. And he said, but we make grants in Central African Republic. And we went there one time and went on the ground and looked at the change that our giving was able to make. And that meant so much more to me than any number of meetings in New York in a boardroom where they showed us what the impact was. And that's just an illustration of the next generation wants to have impact. They're willing to change whatever they need to have that impact, but for them, they need to see it. And that suggests, of course, how we need to adapt to make sure that they can be the donors that they want to be. Now, the question is, what do they want to revolutionize? Many people are worried that they want to revolutionize the causes. They want to stop giving to the arts or stop giving to children or education and only give to those causes that we think of as the next generation's causes, like climate change and human rights. But in fact, for the most of the evidence, including our evidence, suggests that they're not interested in changing the causes. They're still interested in all the causes that their parents and grandparents have been giving to for years. What they want to change is how they give to those causes. They want to change the strategies that they use. They want to come up with new ways of having more impact on education, the same cause, or on the arts. They want to, and there's a number of features of this change. The two I'm going to talk about really is their willingness and interest in innovation and their willingness for how they want to engage with the organizations and partners that they fund. So the first of these, they deeply want to innovate. They believe that one person that we interviewed said, we can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results. We have to try new things. We have to take risks. We have to take the risk of potentially failing and then learning from that failure. And so they're giving to the same areas, but they want to do so in a way that tries new things. And one of the big ones, of course, in this area is impact investing. And so just an example from the book, Justin Rockefeller wrote up his story for us in the book, his story along with his sister Valerie there in the photo, where they came to believe that on the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which is their family foundation, that all the grant making they could do around the world for environmental causes would never do as much good as changing the way that the Rockefeller Brothers Fund invests its endowment. And so they divested of fossil fuel stocks, the greatest oral fortune in the world, divested of fossil fuel stocks. And they believe that that's a tool of innovation in their tool belt that they can use. And we've heard lots of different stories that are similar to this. Another way that I mentioned they want to change things is the strategies is they want to go all in with all of their assets. Even though they have tremendous treasure, they want to go in with time, with talent, with all sorts of other with the ties that they bring, all their testimony, all sorts of other assets that they have to create change. A great example of this in the U.S. is this woman, Victoria Rogers, whose father's probably the most successful financial money manager and investor in the U.S., African-American money manager and investor in the U.S. And she grew up engaging with her time in various ways, where she grew up in Chicago, the same neighborhood as where Murli and Sasha grew up, who were just slightly younger than she was. And she continues to be deeply engaged as a donor in her own right, but always with her time as well as her treasure. She's always engaged in being a board member, being a volunteer. And she says that's the best way that she knows to create the change that she wants to see. And again, we heard this over and over and over again among many of the next gen donors that we interviewed. The final thing I want to talk about is how they want to engage with their families. And I know we're going to talk a lot about multi-generational discussions today. So contrary to what many people think about the next generation, people think of them as wanting to be different than their parents, or at least moving on beyond their parents. We heard, in fact, the metaphor already of passing the baton, and the metaphor of the passing the baton of the relay race is that you receive the baton and then you leave the people behind you and you go off and you're in charge and they're back there. What we found out was that they're much more interested in being engaged with the older generations. And that starts with values. So when we asked them who influenced their giving, these next generation, they said parents and grandparents were clearly at the top of the list, more than peers, more than religious leaders, more than community leaders or others. They were deeply influenced by their parents and grandparents, but it was primarily around values, not around strategy and other things like that. And so they get the value of why it's important to be a philanthropist from their parents and grandparents. We see this. Another person we feature in the book is that writes his story is John R. Seidel, who's the oldest grandchild of Ted Turner, the founder of the UN Foundation. Many people would know who Ted Turner is. And he says, I get this great sense of values of how I want to do good things in the world, but I want to do it in new ways. I want to try new things. I want to try social entrepreneurship and do impact investing, other things that are different from what my grandfather, this big philanthropist, is doing. I get the values from my family, but I live them in different ways. Same thing with this orientation toward being a multi-generational engagement. They want to serve with their older peers. They want to be mentored by older peers, but also be taken seriously. If you think of it as a multi-generational team, they want to be taken seriously as the rookie that's got all the energy, has got the new ideas, is comfortable with new ideas, and wants to take risks. But they also value the wisdom of the veterans, the older generation, and they don't want to leave them behind and take the baton and move on. They want to be on the field together. And this is true within families. This is true on boards and other things. And then, so of all of this, there's a very quick view of many of the findings. I've got a lot more other things that we could talk about, but just to sum up, the people that we talk about a lot as next generation don't think of themselves as next. They think of themselves as the now generation. They want to be engaged right now, and they're looking for places and people and institutions that are willing to bring them on board right now, to give them meaningful leadership roles, not just see them as somebody with a famous last name that can have access to the wealth of the family. They want to, or that are, that's doing things on their own. They want to be seen as people who can bring talents and their time and going all in for those causes they care about, and to do that right, to be invited to do that right now. So there's a great positive outcome of this, the great positive potential, which is they could, because they're so obsessed with impact, they could very well, if they're successful, change a lot of things in our world for the better. And there's a lot of positive things about how they want to give for the same reasons as their parents and grandparents. They still want to give to the same causes. That's the positive news. But there's also a caution that we should be careful about, which is they do want to change things, and they want to change a lot of things, whatever is necessary to change. There are no sort of sacred kind of norms that they won't touch. They're willing to change whatever, and that can be messy. That can cause conflict. And it also means there are a lot of work for those organizations that are trying to engage these donors. They demand a lot more time and attention to make sure that they're being seen, that impact that they want to see. But if we can manage that in the right way and help them launch these philanthropic identities, they're going to be the biggest donors that we've ever seen. And I think that's true globally as well as in the US. So I'll stop there, stop sharing my screen, and come back to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. That was fantastic. I need to make sure I completely finish your book. And what's very clear to me in listening to your comments is that we would benefit quite a bit from that sample set extending itself to Africa, because at least anecdotally, much of what you said really, really rings true. But I think we deserve the opportunity to really dig in. So I really appreciate you sharing those findings. And so what I want us to do is now have a conversation. First of all, again, let me invite our participants, our attendees. Please feel free to start asking questions. We'll go through them as much as we can. There's some in there already. So please put your questions in there, particularly for Michael, but also for Aditya and for Elizabeth as they respond to some of what they've heard Michael say, but also some other points. So I'd like to start at the beginning. I'd like to start at the beginning for the two of you. When I invited Aditya to be a part of this panel, he said he considers himself I think you said a modest philanthropist, right? And I really like that, because ultimately the challenges ahead of us are so enormous that almost anything that we do is going to feel like almost like a drop in the bucket. And I think that probably rings true for everybody. But I want to start at the beginning for the both of you and ask you to kind of start with your why. Can you kind of share with us a bit about your own personal journey to becoming a philanthropist? And what were the things that motivated you and maybe even discouraged you on this road to reach the point where you are today? Elizabeth, would you like to start?
Thank you. So I think, I'm an African, and so some of the challenges that we see every single day, when you know that there is an opportunity to do something about it, I think you naturally transition to do some sort of work, whether it is as a philanthropist or just as a social entrepreneur. I started working at our family foundation really young. My parents started the foundation before they accumulated their wealth. And so it's very much a huge part of who we are as a family, and it is part of our values. And, when having conversations with both of my parents, they care less about the legacy of business and more about the legacy of the impact that they will have on especially the children and vulnerable women that live in the communities that we serve as a business, and also that we interact with as Africans. So I think it's really difficult to pinpoint one why. I think that I've always just had a sense of responsibility towards helping those who don't have. And there's a scripture that says, to whom much is given, much is expected. So I think I'll start there as an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think in our case, the philanthropic initiatives we had grew out of the business itself, needs of employees and families of employees in the business. And I think for me, I grew up in the business, going to my dad's office after school to do my homework and spending time with him, just sort of observing perhaps like the interactions he had and some of the philosophy, his philosophy and my grandfather's. And they felt really deeply that there are a lot of challenges for people living in Nigeria. And even if you're employed, you're still facing a lot of challenges, shortfalls in your income, unexpected events that you're not prepared for. And there are other very well-reputed and probably really active charities and other organizations active that an employed person wouldn't really go to for help, you know, or not necessarily qualify. So we felt really strongly about supporting our staff. And so I think that's something that I grew up with. And that's like kind of the germ and the seed of stuff that we do through our foundation.
Thank you, Aditya. Michael, you talked a lot about some of the key trends that you're seeing from the research. You talked about an obsession with impact, and I love that because ultimately, at the end of the day, whenever we are doing something in this space of giving, everybody's looking for impact. But this concept of focusing on impact is actually relatively new, right? So oftentimes we have seen kind of a focus on outputs and then on outcomes, but impact is a very different kettle of fish altogether. And so I want to ask now both Aditya and Elizabeth to talk a little bit about what does impact mean for you personally and for your organizations that you work with. When I guess you can kind of cast your mind forward 10 years or 15 or 20 years. Actually, when you have when you're now passing the baton on to the next generation, what will success look like for you when you think about the work that you're doing today? Elizabeth, you're smiling, so you go first.
I mean, yeah, I wasn't sure who you wanted to answer the question first.
Open.
So I think that when we talk about the next gen, a couple of things that are, obviously we're not unique, but we're also professionals, and you went through training, right? So in addition to the education that I would have received in the school system, just like anybody else, like my fellow panelists mentioned, when my father was on the board of Rockefeller Foundation, I remember going to the fields, on his site visits. He would take me along. He took me along to even business trips. But from a philanthropy standpoint, you also gain some insight that professionals don't have an opportunity to gain, because you will get away with, oh, my daughter wants to come along, she's in first year university, but you're not going to get away with, oh, my the head of programs wants to come. It's like, no, this is serious business. This is the board. There's no place for them. So you get this additional university, to be honest, that is just an offshoot from what you learn traditionally. And I think as I began to work in the foundation, the same way that I would measure and sort of demand a bottom line performance from a business perspective, I started to demand what our bottom line looked like in a lot of the work that we did. And because we don't have, there isn't a one size fits all when it comes to impact and development work, we began to develop our own internal frameworks, leverage the existing technologies that are there and software that's there around how do you collect data when you're doing in-field work. And we really began to develop our own systems as a team and as a foundation for how we were going to measure impact better. So I'm not going to say the obsession with impact came with us. They were already measuring impact. I think I just came and approached it with a different lens. And for me, if I can measure the company's performance by the number of customers we have, the customer engagement, and the amount of revenue we have, and how we bring down our costs, I want to do the same in philanthropy. The only thing is, because we're a cost center, you have to be a lot more creative around how you do that. And I think that's why we're perceived as being obsessed with impact. But I'm obsessed with results. So if I'm going to be able to maximize what we're doing in the communities for every dollar that we spend, be rest assured that I'm going to be trying to measure it in some way, shape, or form on a regular basis. And I think the last thing I'll mention right around that is that when you measure impact and you find a way to collect this data, you're able to pivot faster. So it's also like that kind of startup mentality, that if I'm going to be flexible and change the way that I'm doing things to respond to the lessons that I just learned, then I've got to be looking at impact as central to how I measure what I do.
Mm-hmm. Great,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot to learn right there for me, and I'm just sort of flashing back over some experiences. We moved from a position of impact of our, like I mentioned earlier, our employee base, which in absolute terms is not a large number, and going towards how can we scale and how can we have more of an impact on a larger group of people. And that quickly becomes quite challenging. How much you want to impact one person, or how many people do you want to impact, say, with the same resources? So trying to balance that is a huge challenge, though I think part of vision and intention, though, is to impact more and more people with the same resources, and therefore being creative, maximizing what happens, seeing how you can measure that is vital. And then to reach that point, though, I think something I wanted to bring up was scalability. So how do you make your let's say your system scalable? And we would have a meeting once a month to review applications that came in from employees, and that meeting could take 2 or 3 hours. And then I think we went into let's split it and let's do it twice a month. And because we took every case as a case-by-case basis. And perhaps you're more cognizant of that individual's needs, and you're sort of tailor-making your intervention or your donation or whatever you say you want to do. Though that takes a lot of time, and we decided to just create, for certain types of cases, a policy, let's say, and wherein you're not getting as much detail, you're reviewing it, you're seeing the few points that you need to know about the case, and you're saying that applies, and this is what we normally do in that case. That creates a lot of scalability in terms of the management time and resources that you have, and also just sort of compressing a bit, being able to create a budget, being able to sort of project a bit about what those costs may be. It's a tough one. It's a very sensitive topic. I think the more I talk about it, the more sensitive I feel about it. Trading scale with intimacy.
That's very, very powerful. And also, Michael, in your comments, you gave an example of one philanthropist that, for him, actually going to the country and engaging with the beneficiaries, the people that were benefiting from that foundation's work, really made the difference for him. And I think that I love the word intimacy, Aditya. It's important, because ultimately when we're engaged in this kind of work, there is that sense of something that pulls us to be our best selves, to do our best, to try and apply best practice to kind of move the agenda forward. So I'd be really interested also to hear from both of you something that you are most proud of in your philanthropic work. What have you seen or experienced? It could be directly you, the organization, or something that you've seen that you really have either you're proud of or very inspired by? I think these are the kind of things I think all of us, everybody who's dialed into this conversation, probably has an example. There's something that they've experienced that really, again, maybe it was an intimate experience where they felt that their ability to give was going to make a huge difference in somebody else's life. Aditya, you can start this time around.
So we got into some more complex work. I've always been fascinated in education, higher education especially. And when I came back from university and I went to a typical liberal arts university in the United States, it's a very general form of, variety of subjects. And I came and joined the family business. And at university, I didn't want to take any business specific courses, but I didn't feel I had developed relevant skills for my career. And there were some resources available outside of the classroom in the university, but not like, it wasn't ever emphasized that this would be really helpful for you. And what are some of the things to think about long term? So we managed to partner with the University of Lagos, and we set up a center there. The topic is more on entrepreneurship and developing entrepreneurship skills, which quickly pivoted into a larger need for career planning. And I think, I'm a bit proud of of going into more complex like curriculum and designing topics and classes, seminars, that sort of thing. And worked with a very small team, and I was really, really, really impressed and continuously impressed by the team's ability to do things on a shoestring and to invite people to speak and to support our initiative to impact students and as well as family members of university staff. I'm really inspired by the university itself. And Federal University in Nigeria, to me, is a form of philanthropy because tuition is subsidized very heavily, or tuition is set by the government, and usually it's not enough to cover the cost to run the institution. So the university itself has to be really adept at figuring out other ways to have revenue, dealing with a huge myriad of problems. Student population of 40,000, really, really complex, difficult work. And what we're doing is also modestly just a drop in the ocean to what the university does. And you meet the administrators, people that commit so much time and I would say heart and real giving to make things work against a lot of odds.
So I'm really proud of what we have been doing at the Higher Life Foundation. I think we have structured ourselves really well for impact. More recently, we have really been collaborating with other philanthropists because, I think there's one of the biggest trends right now is the realization that none of us can shift the needle on our own, and that it's extremely important to find ways in which you can find common ground in terms of the things that you're trying to pursue, and to find ways to collaborate. And some of our more exciting recent collaborations are, we're collaborating on a fund for maternal health, tackling the issue of child mortality in a couple of African countries, which has been great. And it's really collaborating with global philanthropists and also ensuring that it's locally driven in terms of the intervention itself. We partnered on a fund on NTDs, which went extremely well. We were able to drive down the cost of treatment. I just think that some of the ways in which we've approached philanthropy more recently have really given us hope for for what we can do going forward. And then obviously my personal baby, which is the school that I founded when I finished university, still going strong. So yeah, those are some of my favorite accomplishments.
Thanks for that. I think all of us, again, I think all of us have a story around something that really means a lot to us, and we definitely want to see succeed. I want to turn a little bit to the question of taking risks. And Michael, you talked about that in your intro, that the next generation is more willing to take risks. And by virtue of taking more risks, that means being more comfortable with the potential for failure. To have both of you. What does that mean for you? Failure mean? Is there some works through when things? Elizabeth, you can start.
So your network went out, so I didn't catch the question. Sorry. I don't know if anyone else will.
Sorry about that. I was asking about taking risks. Michael was talking about the fact that the next generation typically is more willing to take risks. And by taking risks, that means there needs to be more of a willingness to accept failure. So the question is, can you talk about what that means for you, taking more risks? And how do you deal with situations of failure or things not going according to plan? How do you talk through those things, particularly across different generations?
So I think that when your parents are still in the process of building their business and creating their wealth, you watch them take risks every day. And so taking risks in the foundation is a no-brainer. In fact, you actually look like you're not taking enough risks because of the risks that are required, especially when you're doing business in Africa. I think what I would say about us is, and by us, I mean African philanthropists, I think we are more experimental. So where sometimes there's traditional interventions, we are a little bit more flexible. So for example, when we look at education, right, we do a lot of work in education. And when we realized that there was no way we're going to be able to train enough teachers in time to really meet the need and the gap in terms of numeracy and literacy, it was a no-brainer for us to create a technology solution, partner with our business, to zero rate the platform so that teachers began using technology to teach where they actually really didn't understand much of the content, but then just using training to really catch up on that. So I think we're experimental because we know that we have a much shorter timeline to address much more difficult and complex issues. And at the end of the day, if we don't take risks in how we tackle these social challenges, these are our future customers. So if we're going to secure the future of our businesses and continue to accumulate wealth as a continent, we have to apply some of the same principles to how we approach social work as well.
I'll sort of zero back in on the University of Lagos center that we set up, because it was a complete departure to what we were doing in terms of our internal philanthropy and wanting to sort of reach out to general public. We dipped in a bit initially with scholarships, and I think got known to the university, and they sort of approached us for a donation for the center, and yeah, we said, sure, let's join hands with whomever else wants to participate in this. And like a month passed, and nobody else had, and we were starting to have some meetings. So we sort of got into a position of leading that initiative, which was not really the intention. And but I felt this is exciting. There's going to be some great opportunity. There could be some good benefits for the business as well. Perhaps we'll be able to find some great talent and hire some people from our business through interacting and just creating a community at the university. And but it was actually an environment that I'm not familiar with at all. Quite bureaucratic as well. Some of the things I'd mentioned earlier, some other challenges in terms of income, in terms of unionized staff, university staff, and sometimes faculty go on strike for salary increases. This disrupts the flow of school, disrupts our programming as well. And a lot of times I felt, well, I'm over my head here, and I don't really, this is a different calendar to what we have, and a different culture. And so that was in some ways, and I think when we spoke, Emma, you and I one-on-one, I define it as a failing as well, because we invested quite a lot of money into an initiative that has actually challenged us a lot more, and we've had to wait a long time. We've accumulated overhead without really feeling that we've had impact. Yet it still is it's some form of drive. Like the challenge drives me and drives the team, that yes, things are changing, and we've come up with a different way of reaching students, and a different format or event. So I saying that it almost didn't seem like a risk at first, and then it was something that looking back at it, or seeing it for what was starting to evolve, like, oh my gosh, what have we done? We've taken a plunge here, and we need to now scramble around and divert our attention to really figure out new solutions for problems we didn't even expect.
No, that's great. And what I'm hearing there is, having bold ambitions means it necessarily means taking big risks. And oftentimes I think what we see is quite small. So they pursue initiatives. I see my internet is a little bit unstable again. They pursue initiatives that, have low risk of failure. But then of course there is the upside. There is going to be not very impactful. And I think that's a challenge for many families when they're thinking about how they actually want to move their philanthropy forward. Are they willing actually to make a big bet? And on the other side of that, it may not be successful. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to ask both Michael and Ndidi, you've heard Elizabeth and Aditya make some comments about their own experiences. See if you have any questions for them at this stage as well.
Thank you so much, Aditya. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Elizabeth, Tanya. Great interventions. So I know both Aditya and Elizabeth, and I've known them for many years. I've watched them blossom into full-time philanthropists, or not full-time, but fully formed, amazing philanthropists. So thank you for your great work. So I want to start with Elizabeth. When I first heard Elizabeth speak many years ago, it struck me, and I think on this panel, Elizabeth, there are going to be parents who want to get their children into philanthropy. And so from your own experience, what advice and ideas will you give those parents? Aditya, the same with you. And Michael, you've studied this. So what specific ideas and advice do you give to parents listening in? And for Elizabeth, she struck me, she said, back in Morocco at one of the first Africa Philanthropy Forum sessions, she said, do you remember this, Elizabeth? You said it was your birthday party. You were turning 7 or 8 and you wanted a big birthday party. And when you showed up at this birthday party, you didn't recognize most of the children because your mom had gone all the neighboring orphanages to bring kids to the birthday party. And that struck you. And it struck me, it stayed with me as a very interesting approach that your mom took to introduce you to philanthropy. not many kids, those of us who have kids, not many kids would be as gracious as you were and would have learned what you learned from that experience. But I'm just curious, from your experience, is it a push-pull? How do we manage this delicately to ensure that our children care? I think many of the generation after you, for me as a mom, I can say are very focused on self. How do we get them to focus on others? And what is the strategy you utilize? And I'll also ask Aditya the same question. And then Michael, if you can jump in from an expert perspective.
I think that our approach to how we see philanthropy and how we see helping others has to evolve with how the world evolves. When I was in primary school, there was no Facebook and no Instagram. I know I'm revealing my age here. And so we grew up in a different time where, reading books and excursions was the way in which we got exposed to the world. And now the next gen are getting exposed to the world in a much more different way. And I think that social media has played a huge role in focusing on self. And so we need to make more of an effort to use those existing platforms to tell positive stories. Why should people care? I think a lot of people who have a voice and a platform haven't quite directed it to others. And I think that that's where you sort of see the relationship between innovation, technology, and where we are in the philanthropic sector. I think, as you mentioned, I've always walked alongside my mom in philanthropy. So I think her then handing over the reins of running the foundation to me was kind of a no-brainer. I won't lie, I think it came a lot earlier than I expected. But I think that when it's part of your values and there's greater platforms with positive messaging, there's more of a chance to let people care.
Terrific. And you've done a great job and made all of us very proud. So well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Aditya, what about you? Push, pull, and delicate balance. What advice would you give to the moms and dads and CEOs on the call?
Well, I think because we were talking about how philanthropy is perhaps, Elizabeth mentioned, perhaps less risky than, say, a business operation. And to be honest, I'm still trying to pull some reins for business activity from my father, who's still quite active. Though with the nonprofit, the philanthropic initiatives, he was happy for me to take more of an interest and spend time on it. So I think it was quite easy for him. I didn't have to pull much, though I think what he gave me that was his philosophy and his passion for it. And so that just felt like a real responsibility area that I wanted to support him in that vision. And so perhaps there was some form of like-mindedness. For me, it felt like, yep, that's a great approach. And I wanted to kind of systematize it a bit more. And I think that made things a bit easier in the way that we administered it. And then sort of when I approached with say the university project, I went with the interest. I wanted his guidance to, and advice on it, but he was more interested in just having me explore and find out for myself how things would shape out. So the advice I'd give to parents, I don't know, I think just good conversations around the philosophy. A very simple one that he had and which my grandfather had was charity begins at home. Charity begins at home, and let's do the best we can there. And I think that's fundamental to the way that I think about it anyway. So it's kind of ingrained. And I think Michael sort of reinforced that idea, which was the values when he gave his presentation, which I found interesting, was that the causes don't necessarily change, but just how we do it.
I think this point you're raising, values, is so important because, there are some people who are known as philanthropists outside, but their staff are not treated with the same level of respect and support. So modeling that to your children from an early age is really important, right? And actually discussing that. Now, Michael, what have you seen? What are some best practices to getting the next gen interested and engaged?
Yeah, well, thanks for this. This has been fascinating to listen to the stories. I will say a couple of things, and I think it connects to what we've already heard. So one is that we did as part of this research, we did a whole set of best practices for families, based on what the next generation, many interviews and surveys we did with the next generation about what they would like from their families, and then a couple of things come out of that. Number one thing is they want to be involved earlier than you think maybe even they should be involved. So they want to be at the table. They want to be shown the path to the ability to be part of the decision group very early on. So there's this challenge, especially true in the US with family foundations, but it's true, I'm sure, in families all over the world, that it's Thanksgiving time in the US. And so there's always the classic image of the kids' table at Thanksgiving, right? There's the adults table, and then all the kids sit at the separate table. And at what age do you get to be part of the adults table, and when are you stuck at the kids' table? And there's philanthropic stories in the US where kids' table is until you're 55, and then you get to move to the adults table to your age 55. And that's exactly the wrong thing that the next gen, they may be at the kids' table, but they want the kids' table to be taken seriously, given maybe some money from the family to do their own giving together with all the cousins or other things, and to be giving training and help. And then they want to be shown the path. So here's what, the oldest cousin gets to serve in this way, according, when they're this age, and then when they've demonstrated that they can do these kind of things. So they want to know that they're going to be able to be part of that multi-generational family decision structure and family giving vehicle early on. So the most important thing is start early and give them a role. The other part is to show them the impact of the family's giving. There's this image that the next generation, it doesn't really care too much about legacy. They don't care about what the family's been doing. But we found they're very focused on legacy. They want to make the legacy their own, and they want to contribute to that legacy. And so showing them what the family is doing and how that impact is being made, I think, is really significant. So that's a big part of it, is showing them the impact. And then two other things I'll say. One is around values. One is that they want to have the conversation about values. We find a lot of older generations in families who think, my next generation, they vote for a different person for politics, and they talk in different ways about their peers, and they just feel like they have different values than me, and I don't want to upset the family dynamic, and so we're just not going to talk about values. We'll just talk about strategy. And what we found is that when you talk about values and you use some of these tools that are out there to help this multi-generational values conversation, there's always values that you find in common. So they're being expressed in different ways, but the values at their core, when you back the conversation up to values, they're very often similar values, because the next generation got those values in many cases from the family. And so that you're just talking about how those values are being lived in different ways allows you to then, because many of the conflicts will end up being about risk and strategy and other things more than values. And then the final thing I'll say is, one of the things Elizabeth said earlier that really struck me was being allowed to go along with her father to meetings, and it was like, she said, it was like another university. And I think that there's a story in our book, Sarah OJ, who's the daughter of Mansur OJ, who was the head of Tag Group, the Tag Heuer watches and McLaren autos and other things. He was French, and she grew up in Switzerland, but with an American mother, and she lives in the US now. She said when she was in her teens in Switzerland, her parents they wanted her and her siblings to learn and to get a chance to learn what kind of philanthropist they wanted to be. And so they gave them a certain amount of money. They connected them to this group of philanthropic advisors, and they said, go and figure out what you like to do in a relatively safe environment. with where the consequences of the downside were going to be soft, but where they could explore things. And she said, I was a 13-year-old. I did not want to do that. I didn't want to spend my time figuring out, going to meetings and reading grant proposals and stuff. But she said, in the end, it's the most powerful thing, one of the most powerful learning experiences I've ever had. And she says now, even as a young person, she has become a very significant and thoughtful and strategic philanthropist. She's part of Maverick Collective, which some of you may be familiar with, is this international organization of women that give. And she says a lot of that comes from my parents trusting me and giving me the guidance I needed to figure out what I was passionate about, what was meaningful giving for me. And so I think giving the next generation that alternate university, that ability to learn by seeing and by doing at an early age is a great, sort of best practice, I think, for many families that we saw.
Thank you. I love those insights. So powerful. So thank you, Elizabeth, Tanya, Aditya, and Michael. I just wanted to add 2 things from my own experience. Emma mentioned we have a family foundation, but learning from so many of you, we decided to start getting our children to start early, giving their books and their old clothes to causes every year. Then they started leading drives and volunteering. And it's an issue of time, talent, and then treasure. And they started volunteering for Lagos Food Bank, right? And then now with the Family Foundation, it's interesting because we share with them what we're doing and sometimes take them to the different causes. And now that my daughter started her own nonprofit, Preserve Our Roots, she actually then says, oh, Muna can pay for this. Muna Foundation can pay for this. And I have to say, well, did you ask? And this is the issue. There have to be clear boundaries, right? And clear systems and structures so that it doesn't become a huge opportunity to then allocate programs. But I think that exposure, the time and talent is so important before the treasure. And that volunteering and serving is critical. So I think you can start wherever you are. There are people who are writing saying, well, we don't have a fund, we don't have a foundation. How do we get children involved? There are many, many ways. And I think as we get to the end of the year, this is a time to reinforce the values of giving your time and your talent to causes that you care about. And over time, as the treasure gets structured, then you introduce them to that as well. Thank you. I'll hand it back to Emma.
Thank you. Actually, what we want to do now is go do a poll. So I'm going to launch that poll. It's just a few questions. If you guys can help us answer some of those questions from your laptop or your phone, wherever you are. Let's see how this works. So hopefully you see 5 questions come up on your screen. We'll continue the conversation while you guys are answering some of them. If you could, that would be very helpful for us. You answer some of those, so you can see the poll, right, everybody? Yeah, okay, great. So, but let's keep talking, and let's there are a number of questions that I'd love for us to tackle while people are answering the poll questions, and we'll give some feedback from some of those. And Didi actually tackled one of them, which is, how about if I don't have much to give. I don't have parents who are philanthropists, nor do I have the resources. And I think that's for us part of the reason why we set this organization up, because we oftentimes have been thinking about philanthropy in one kind of fixed way. And at least in the African context, again, I hate to make generalizations about Africa, stereotypes about Africa. It's a very diverse place. But it's true that across the continent, philanthropy is part of many cultures. That giving back, paying it forward is a part of many cultures. It's informal. Some of it's structured, some of it's unstructured, but it exists. And so rather than think that we have to kind of adopt a form that we see in the Bill Gates of the world, there are models that are informal and unstructured models that have been very effective. And so the opportunity is to try and find what those are. The challenge, and even Michael, you talked about, information. We don't have the data. We don't have a lot of data here. It's going to be very anecdotal. It will require you to ask a lot of questions, and then to use the term that Elizabeth use this to experiment. You know, experimentation can happen with small amounts and big amounts. But I think that's really the opportunity here for us to really think about philanthropy very differently. And that in and of itself can make a huge difference. And one of the questions here was, let's see, why donate? One panelist, one attendee thinks that we should stop donating and that we should actually focus on social entrepreneurship and impact investing. That is the way forward to end poverty. So what would you, any of you can answer this question, what would you say about kind of donations versus kind of structured giving that leads to measured impact? What would you say to that? Anybody can jump in on that one.
I think I would say right now as we speak, there are children who are hungry. There's children who didn't go to school today. There is probably, I can't remember the statistics, but a number of mothers and babies died during the duration of this call because hospitals didn't have either enough healthcare workers or there wasn't equipment in the hospital. There are schools today where children went to school and there was no teacher. If we don't donate, then we are going to continue to lose lives and continue to see children with no opportunities. And so we can't live in a world where we don't help each other each and every day. So we have to do both. I think social entrepreneurship is a long-term horizon to dealing with social issues, but it does not take away the fact that there are people dying every second of every day from social issues that sometimes we have the power to help even just one.
Michael, Aditya, any thoughts on that?
Just to say, I agree absolutely with Elizabeth's perspective. There's no all or nothing approach that can be had, I think. She said it so powerfully, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, we teach this a lot in the School of Philanthropy. We have to, you know, make sure that we're justifying our existence in part too. But I think another reason to add to that powerful one that Elizabeth gave is the idea is around experimentation. So you know, there's a lot of people who struggle with the idea, does turning to philanthropy, particularly philanthropy driven by elites and the wealthiest of a society, does that undermine democracy or things that the state should be doing or that we should be doing in these sort of more accountable ways and transparent ways that ideally you would do through government, or through more scalable ways through business or investing or other things. And you know what, one role that philanthropy can play in many cases is this kind of, there's a famous phrase where philanthropy is society's passing gear, right? When you need to that extra boost to figure out, okay, maybe we need to really emphasize this for a while, and or we need to try this out, and it's not we can't try it out in the same way in business or in government, but the philanthropy we can do a demonstration project or so other things to see whether there's proof of concept, whether it makes sense to have this new kind of intervention for helping young girls, with to make sure they go to school, whatever. And so philanthropy can play that role in a unique way. I think that then they can hand off those ideas to other sectors like, business and others. So entrepreneurship is not simply, another way to put it is entrepreneurship is not simply a value in the business sector. It can very much be a value in the philanthropic sector.
Yeah, I also add to that and say that with our family philanthropy, we do have as percentage of the funds that will every year be for donations, and that's going to be, there's a ceiling for that, because we recognize that there are just some massive challenges. They are emergencies. There's a crisis. There's something that people feel very strongly about, and not giving those people an opportunity to do something about, I think, would be heartbreaking, right? So you have a foundation, but something is really important and we're not able to help. I think people would find that very, very difficult. But great question, because oftentimes we don't distinguish donations from grant making and kind of impact focused giving. So it's a good question, and something that if those of you who are thinking about structured giving, you should think about what that differential is for you, for yourselves. There's a question here for you, Elizabeth, about how you select, your organization selects students in Zimbabwe. How do you, yeah, I'm sure there are many needy students. What's your process for determining which students will be beneficiaries of your foundation's work?
So I think it's important to remember that, you know, and this is, I think, more for listeners, it's not for the panelists, that a philanthropic work is structured just like a business. So the same way that Apple doesn't sell fruit or microwaves is the same way that in philanthropy, we're very intentional about how we structure things. We have scholarship programs in Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Burundi, Kenya, and we also have a leadership academy where we recruit from all over the continent. So we have different types of scholarships when it comes to our education programming. We have, our main scholarship is for orphaned and vulnerable children. We support children who live in institutions. So if you're a child and you're in Zimbabwe and you live in a registered institution, you can go to our nearest office in Zimbabwe. We have an office in every province, and we will give you a scholarship. But we also have scholarships for academically gifted students. And this is where really collaboration and partnership with government and other institutions comes in, because we actually collaborate with the government and we collaborate with schools. And we actually allow schools to also tell us which students they think should be on our scholarship. So it's a very structured way in which we do stuff. But with our academically gifted students, we go to the ministry, they give us a list. We go to the schools where the lists are coming from, they also give us input, and then we actually interview each and every one of our students, whether you're a vulnerable student or academically gifted. We want to know that you're committed to being your better self, because it's not enough to give someone a scholarship. But this is like after 26 years of learning how best to give a scholarship.
Thank you for that. And I think, you know, again, we have a lot of people in the audience here who are really at the first couple of steps of their journey in philanthropy. And this really is an opportunity to kind of hear what happens over time. So there are lots of lessons to be learned from organizations that have been there in the space. But it's clear that, you know, there's learning, right? Work the way you expect, and you try again. So I hope that people on the call feel inspired that, you know, you start to take those steps and move forward. There's a question about impact in terms of if you think about it from job creation, because if you create one job, the impact can be on up to 30 people. And that's in the African context, I think something that many of us can appreciate. Pays above a living wage, can actually support many people. So the being in the space of job creation and job maintenance is huge. So that's something I think very much worth noting. There's a comment here about and I think I'm getting this right, about in many countries, and Didi mentioned this at the start, right? We have many countries in Africa where there's quite a bit of conflict, and it's a very unstable environment. How should we be thinking? This is maybe a question for you, Michael. How should we be thinking about those kind of giving in those kind of environments where the structures just aren't there, the need is deep, the structures aren't necessarily there?
Can I
that's
just
a
add
really
to it?
tough.
Sorry, Michael, let me add to it this question, because we also are seeing a lot of African philanthropists not give to issues around democracy, the rule of law, because of the risks associated with that as well. So can you address that? And then I would love to hear from Elizabeth and Aditya about how they think about giving to some of these really critical, fundamental issues that define democracies and governments that work.
Yeah, I don't know that I would have any absolutely brilliant insight on that, because that's such a difficult question, and you're right in that the challenge is philanthropy is generally very risk averse, and even and people also don't want to do things that are also either going to lead to potentially unintended bad consequences, or to sort of such as contributing in a way that adds to the conflict unintentionally, or that raises that raises questions about your role that lead to challenges for you as a philanthropist in anything else you want to try to do, where you become sort of associated with a particular approach. I mean, we've seen that in various places. I would say one of the brief things I would suggest is collaboration. So the idea of donors working together on causes seems to work well in these kind of situations, so that people don't feel that they're the only the only voice out there trying to work on something, and frankly, addressing issues around conflict is going to take significant leverage and resources, and it's rare to find one or two people who can really make a lot of impact in those situations. I think working together and using not just collaborating financially, but collaborating in terms of networks and ideas, and building a sort of a unified front for certain goals that you want to achieve in a sort of a conflict situation. I think collaboration is always important, but it becomes even more important in a conflict, in an arena when you're trying to give in conflict. So, but it's a tough question.
It is. I think one of the most respected African philanthropist, Mo Ibrahim, said that he doesn't think he would have been able to do what he does around rule of law and governance if he still had his business. We have to be very mindful of the environment in which our businesses are in, and sometimes that does place limitations on what we can and can't do. But I will say that around collaboration, we recently have collaborated with Alma Philanthropies on a fund called Masanawa Africa. They came up with this brilliant concept around, and it's not new, but I think they just came up with it in a way that is refined. So we've put together a fund where we're all putting in money so that we can fund smaller organizations where some only need $100,000 in a year, because we have to recognize that not every organization is supposed to scale and be this massive NGO in order to create impact. But also, sometimes the requirements for you to be able to get a grant are so heavy that you don't have the capacity as a smaller organization. And so we've created a model where we're building capacity within these small organizations so that they don't have the heavy burden of reporting, but making sure we have a pooled fund to be able to support them and monitor them closely. And so I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of these collaborative efforts. But I think that as the new thing that we really need to think about is, how do we fund smaller organizations on the ground? We have to push and support local philanthropy and local giving.
I want to add in this, I think for collaboration to be successful, for a body to really have a defined goal and an area of specialization, to be as specific as possible about what are you trying to do and how are you trying to do it. So I've also spoken in broad strokes, and I think I suffer a bit from broad strokes where I say higher education, but then we drill down a bit more into entrepreneurship. And as we did that, we started to just be a bit more successful in what we're doing. So like the more specific one is, the greater the impact. And then I think that leads to a more fluid form of collaboration, where it's very clear what one party brings to the party, and somebody has a great way to implement. They have technology, another person has access to a local community, and that's where I guess the magic happens.
Yeah, actually, there's a question also. This topic of collaboration is a big one. One of the things that we've seen is that, and I think you also mentioned this, Michael, that there's really an opportunity for this next generation of, or the now generation, to collaborate more, and they're much more willing to collaborate. So that theme is something that, as Wealth for Impact, is that we are going to be continuing to visit and think about. You know, how do we get better collaboration? It is the case that the philanthropic space tends to be a little secretive, right? People tend to, you know, tends to be a family initiative, and unless it gets to a certain size, people typically, you know, they're working with their families, and then they're doing their work, but they don't necessarily publicize their impact or talk about it amongst themselves. But by not doing so, there's a limitation on how others can learn. So one thing we do want to encourage a Wealth for Impact is greater collaboration by that will help the poll that we just did. So quickly, Elizabeth, I think the Elizabeth effect has worked here, because most of our participants are from Southern Africa, with West Africa coming in second. And it's great to see that the majority of people on this call have family members that are involved in some sort of structured giving. That's fantastic. Right? So for a long time, my family was only involved in informal giving. There was nothing structured about it. So we've just really started to put together some real structure. So it's great to see 57% of in terms of the most important skill that the next
Emma, maybe turn off your video, because we're really struggling to hear you. Maybe we should turn off your video.
The philanthropic space, more innovation and willingness to think out of the box has come on. Oh, sorry. Okay. Hopefully that's better. So the second one was impact, more focus on regarding the question, how much time would you be willing to volunteer for a family-led philanthropic effort? 58% of you, 58% said that you'd be willing to devote a significant amount of your time. That is very, very encouraging. Again, it validates our thinking around there is just a desire to revolutionize the way we give in Africa, make it much more sustainable, much more impactful. So that is really encouraging to see that people would be willing to give so much of their time to do that. So thank you so much for those data points. They will help us as we think about our research going forward. So I will just want to go around the circle, the virtual room here as we close, and ask all of the panelists to just give, this came up as one of the questions in the Q&A, and also a question that I have for you around advice. You know, what advice would you have for somebody who has a big heart for philanthropy and just wants to start now? Maybe they don't have a big budget, but they have a big heart. What would you offer as just one piece of advice for that person? Michael, do you want to go? You look like you're still thinking, so maybe Aditya, would you like to go first?
I would say, just if you do have limited means, start at home. And, you know, I've said that a few times, or we think it starts at home, but otherwise start with your time. You know, just providing time for people is just such a contribution as it is. And it's probably good to think beyond monetary contribution. What could you do with your time?
I think
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think philanthropy is a very specific thing, right? It's the same way that you kind of have to go to med school to become a doctor. That to be a philanthropist, there's a wealth transfer there's an accumulation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very specific thing, but there's so many other ways to impact the world. And you know, it's creating products. With some of you live in communities where there isn't even a shop where people can buy basic goods. They have to travel long distances. There are so many ways in which you can impact the world. Philanthropy doesn't have to be the one that that is your primary one. So I totally agree with what has just been said. But I also, just in closing, want to acknowledge the incredible work that the diaspora are doing. I think the number is as high as $95 billion a year comes into Africa from the diaspora to be able to help their families. And there is no bigger message that Africans give than that. It might not be formal, it might not be structured, and not everything has to be formal and structured from the beginning. I think the diaspora is doing a lot for Africa. And I think we all just have to remember that Africa is a young continent. We still have a lot to do, and the little that everybody is doing is pushing us forward. Let's not be under pressure to be like the massive American philanthropists who experienced their breakthrough and their independence centuries before we did. And thank you so much for having me.
I'll just say really quickly that I think it connects to what both of they were saying, which is there's some scholars in South Africa who talk about the importance of horizontal philanthropy in Africa, and that there are long traditions. We've already mentioned it here, very long generational traditions of giving in very different ones across the continent. And so you don't need to be, to go to university and get a degree and have a lot of money to be able to become a philanthropist. You are already, in many ways, already a philanthropist. And so leaning into those sort of cultural traditions that you've grown up with about giving and sharing and community engagement, and then building on that and finding ways to contribute to sort of lean into those cultural dynamics already, I think would be the best. And that applies to everyone, not just those who can do, write big checks. So I would say, lean into who you already are.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael Moody, Elizabeth, Tanya, Aditya, Chellaram, the invitation to have this conversation. I see my internet is unstable, but turn off my video again. So thank you very much for giving us your time. We weren't able to answer all of the questions. There are more that are actually coming through now. So we'll think about a way to respond to some of those questions after the fact. But this has been very helpful for us as well, because we are thinking about how we move the needle forward, how we actually really kind of support and inspire the creation of more family-led philanthropy in Africa that is impactful and is sustainable. That is our goal. We want to do it in Africa and in the African diaspora, and partnership is going to be key. But information, anecdotal, data-driven, all of this is going to inform how we take this message forward. So we're really happy to have this conversation, and grateful for all the people that weighed in to listen in and to participate. And your questions have been very helpful. And please be in touch with us, because we'd love to talk to any of you who've dialed in, questions you may have, because again, we're in the stage of trying to move this forward in collaboration, and understanding what the opportunity is critical to make this a success. So thank you very much to all of you. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, wherever in the world you are. Be blessed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you,
Ndidi.
Emma.